In the dim study of the Mitchell estate, a distinguished man in his early 60s sat motionless before an unfolded document, his weathered hands gripping the paper with barely controlled tremor. To the three people standing frozen behind him, he appeared lost in thought. But Leo Mitchell's mind was racing through 30 years of memories, each one now tainted with doubt. The DNA report in his hands wasn't just paper and ink. It was a grenade about to detonate his entire world. Leo's eyes traced the clinical words again and again, searching for a different meaning that wasn't there. Would this document confirm his darkest suspicions, or would it reveal something far worse than he'd ever imagined? This is not just a story about wealth and inheritance. It's a story about fatherhood, identity, betrayal, and the devastating question that haunts us all. What if everything you believed about your life was a lie? Before we begin, what will you rate this story from 0 to 10? And what part of the world are you watching from? Comment your country below. Let's build a global community rooted in kindness and second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and inspires us to keep creating more emotional stories of resilience and healing. Thank you for being part of our journey. Your presence matters more than you know. Now, let's continue. The amber glow of the study's antique lamps cast long shadows across mahogany furniture that had witnessed 3 generations of Mitchell family secrets. This room was a temple of legacy, walls lined with leather-bound first editions, framed photographs documenting decades of family milestones, and in the corner, a vintage globe that Leo's own father had taught him about building empires. Leo Mitchell was not an ordinary man. At 62, he had clawed his way from middle-class obscurity to become one of the nation's wealthiest self-made billionaires, a name whispered in boardrooms, featured in Forbes, and feared by competitors. But beneath the tailored suits and the commanding presence, his heart carried scars invisible to the world. 30 years of marriage to Leslie, 2 sons he'd raised with his own hands, a legacy built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And now, standing in this room that had always been his sanctuary, everything felt like shifting sand beneath his feet. That was why he sat frozen in his chair that evening, staring at the DNA report, his family standing behind him in terrible silence. The document wasn't there by accident. He had requested it deliberately, suspecting his daughter-in-law of Sarah of infidelity, a simple concern about his grandchildren's paternity. But what the tests revealed went far deeper than an affair. It exposed a conspiracy of silence that stretched back before his sons were even born. In the suffocating quiet of the study, Leo could hear his wife Leslie's shallow breathing. She stood directly behind him, the elegant woman he'd loved for 3 decades, now a stranger. Her hand covered her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears that weren't quite guilt and weren't quite regret. To her left stood Zeller, 29, the eldest son, confident, ambitious, a younger version of Leo himself. His arms were crossed defensively, his jaw clenched, confusion and anger battling across his features. To her right stood Elsie, 26, the sensitive one, the son who'd always sought Leo's approval, who'd never quite fit the corporate mold, but had tried so hard anyway. His face had gone pale, his eyes searching his father's back for answers. Behind them all, barely visible in the doorway, stood Sarah, Zeller's wife, the woman whose suspected affair had triggered this entire investigation. But now her transgression seemed almost irrelevant compared to the earthquake splitting the Mitchell family apart. Leo finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion he'd been suppressing for hours. "Someone needs to explain to me," his hands trembled as he held up the report, "how I raised 2 sons for 30 years who don't share a single strand of my DNA."
The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Leslie's sob broke the silence. "Leo, please, let me explain." "Explain?" Leo's voice cracked. He still hadn't turned around. He couldn't bear to look at them yet. "Explain 30 years of lying to my face? Explain watching me bond with children who were never mine? Explain—" His voice broke completely. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Zeller stepped forward, his voice sharp with confusion. "Those are our kids' DNA tests, not ours." Leo finally turned in his chair. His eyes, usually so commanding in business meetings, were red-rimmed and devastated. "That's what I thought too, son. That's exactly what I thought." He pulled out a second set of documents from his desk drawer. "But when your mother and Dr. Harris got nervous about my request, when they started acting strange, I decided to run another test, a private one." The color drained from Leslie's face. "Dr. Harris," Elsie whispered, recognition dawning. "Our family doctor? The guy who's been at every birthday, every graduation?" "The man who's been lying to me for over 30 years, Leo finished, his voice hollow. "The man who's apparently the biological father of my sons." The room erupted. Zeller's denial, Elsie's shocked questions, Leslie's desperate attempts to explain. Sarah backing slowly toward the door, realizing she'd walked into a family apocalypse that made her own secrets look microscopic. But Leo heard none of it. He was staring at the family portrait on his desk, taken just last Christmas, everyone smiling, everyone playing their roles perfectly. A family built on lies, an empire with no true heir, a father who'd never actually been one. And somewhere in his mind, a single question burned. What do I do now? 6 months before the DNA report shattered everything, Leo Mitchell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office in downtown Chicago, watching the evening traffic crawl along Lakeshore Drive. At 62, he should have been thinking about retirement, about finally taking that trip to Tuscany Leslie kept mentioning, about letting his sons take over Mitchell Industries completely. Instead, he found himself replaying a scene he'd witnessed 3 days ago at the company's 4th of July barbecue. It wasn't anything dramatic, that was the problem. If Sarah had been obvious about it, he could have dismissed it as innocent. But it was the small things, the way she'd touched Matt Ashton's arm while laughing at something he'd said, how they'd both glanced around before slipping away from the crowd near the gazebo, the flush in Sarah's cheeks when she'd returned 20 minutes later with a fresh gin and tonic. Matt was 34, MIT educated, and Leo's director of operations, sharp as a tack, loyal for the past 8 years, married with twin daughters. Not the type Leo would ever suspect of crossing lines. But then again, Leo had built his fortune on reading people, on trusting his gut when the numbers didn't add up. And something wasn't adding up. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Mitchell, your son is here for your 5 o'clock. "Send him in." Zeller entered with that confident stride Leo had always admired, the walk of a man who knew he belonged in these offices, who'd earned his VP title through actual work rather than nepotism. At 29, Zeller was everything Leo had hoped he'd become, sharp, ambitious, hungry to prove himself. He'd married Sarah 3 years ago in a ceremony at the Drake Hotel that had cost more than Leo's first house. "Dad," Zeller dropped into the leather chair across from Leo's desk. "You wanted to see me?" Leo turned from the window, studying his son's face. God, he looked so much like Leo had at that age. Same square jaw, same intensity in the eyes. "How are things at home? With Sarah?" Zeller's eyebrows rose slightly. "Fine. Great, actually. Why?" "Just checking in, making sure my boy's happy." Leo moved to his desk, picked up a crystal paperweight, a gift from the Chicago Business Association. "She seemed to be having a good time at the barbecue last week." Yeah, she loved it. Said it reminded her why she fell in love with this family. Zeller grinned, though she did complain about her heels sinking into the lawn.
Leo forced a smile. She spent a lot of time talking with Matt Ashton. Matt? Zeller shrugged. Sure, they were on the planning committee together. Sarah volunteered to help with the event coordination, remember? Of course, the planning committee, a perfectly reasonable explanation. So why did Leo's instincts still scream that something was wrong? Zeller, I need you to be straight with me. Have you noticed anything different about Sarah lately? Any changes in her schedule, her mood? His son's face clouded. Dad, what are you getting at? I'm not getting at anything. I'm just... Leo set down the paperweight. Look, I've been doing this long enough to recognize when something's off. Call it an old man's paranoia if you want. It is paranoia. Zeller stood abruptly. Sarah loves me. She loves his family. Whatever you think you saw, you're wrong. He headed for the door, then paused. And honestly, maybe focus on your own marriage before you start analyzing mine. The door clicked shut, leaving Leo alone with his suspicions and the uncomfortable truth in his son's parting shot. His own marriage. 30 years with Leslie, and lately she'd been distant too, distracted, always on her phone, always finding reasons to leave the room when he entered. Leo returned to the window, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. Below, millions of people lived their lives, kept their secrets, made their choices. Somewhere in this city, the truth was waiting to destroy him. He just didn't know it yet. Dr. Robert Harris had been the Mitchell family physician since 1993, back when Leo was still grinding 18-hour days in a cramped office in Schaumburg, trying to turn his startup into something that mattered. They'd met at a charity fundraiser at the Union League Club, both nursing overpriced bourbon and complaining about Chicago property taxes. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged business cards, and within a month, Harris had become not just Leo's doctor, but his friend, the kind who showed up to your house with a bottle of Maker's Mark when your father died, who remembered your kids' birthdays, who knew all your secrets because he'd been there for every crisis. Harris had been in the delivery room when Zeller was born 29 years ago, coaching Leslie through her breathing, while Leo paced the hallway like a caged animal. 3 years later, he'd done it again for Elsie. He'd stitched up Zeller's forehead after that skateboarding accident in 7th grade, diagnosed Elsie's appendicitis sophomore year, and written prescriptions for Leo's high blood pressure that he never bothered filling. More than a doctor, family. Which made what Leo was about to ask feel like a betrayal. The morning after the confrontation with Zeller in the parking lot, Leo sat in the waiting room of Harris's private practice in Oak Brook, thumbing through a torn copy of Golf Digest without seeing the pages. His coffee from Dunkin' had gone cold in his hand. Around him, other patients coughed and scrolled through their phones, oblivious to the bomb Leo was about to drop. "Mr. Mitchell?" the nurse smiled. "Doctor will see you now." Harris's office hadn't changed in 3 decades. Same mahogany desk, same Northwestern Medical School diploma on the wall, same photos of his kids at their weddings. Harris himself looked distinguished at 67, silver-haired and fit, the kind of doctor who still made house calls and remembered when medicine was about relationships, not billing codes. "Leo!" Harris stood, extending his hand with that familiar firm grip. "I didn't see you on the schedule. Everything okay? Leslie all right?" "Leslie's fine. Everyone's fine." Leo sat down, suddenly aware of how his heart was hammering. "I need to ask you something. Doctor-patient confidentiality, right?" Harris's smile dimmed slightly. He lowered himself back into his chair, the leather creaking. "Of course, always. What's going on?" "I need you to run some tests. DNA tests. Paternity tests, specifically." Leo watched his friend's face. "For Jackson and Kimberly, Zeller's kids." The transformation was immediate and unmistakable. Harris's face went pale, his hand reaching up to loosen his tie, though it wasn't tight.
His eyes darted to the door, then back to Leo, then to his desk where his hands started shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "Paternity tests," Harris repeated, his voice oddly flat. "For your grandchildren." "I know how it sounds, Bob. Trust me, I know. But I've been seeing things. Sarah and one of my employees, Matt. The way they act around each other. I just need to know. I need to be sure." Harris stood abruptly, walked to his window overlooking the parking lot. His shoulders were rigid, his breathing audible in the quiet room. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "Leo, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? These kinds of tests, they don't just answer questions, they create new ones." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Harris turned, and Leo saw something he'd never seen in his friend's eyes before. Fear, raw, undisguised fear. "It means that once you open this door, you can't close it. Some truths destroy families." Leo felt ice water trickle down his spine. "Bob, you're scaring me. Is there something you know that I don't?" No, I just..." Harris's hand trembled as he rubbed his face. "I'm just saying, as your friend, as someone who's known you for 30 years, maybe you should talk to Zeller first, really talk to him, work through whatever's happening in his marriage before you..." "Before what? Before I find out my grandkids aren't actually related to me?" Leo stood now too, anger replacing confusion. "Why are you fighting me on this? It's a simple test. You've run hundreds of them."
Harris stared at him for a long moment, and Leo could practically see the war happening behind his eyes. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry. It's such a painful thing for families to go through. So you'll do it?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, I'll do it. Bring the kids in next week. Say it's for their flu shots or something. I'll take the samples myself, send them to the lab." "How long for results?" 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. Harris returned to his desk, pulled out a prescription pad with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Leo, before you go, are things okay? Between you and Leslie, I mean?" The question came out of nowhere, catching Leo off guard. "What? Yeah, why?" "No reason, just making sure." Harris wouldn't meet his eyes. "Marriage is hard. 30 years is a long time. Sometimes we take for granted the people who've been with us from the beginning." Leo left the office 10 minutes later with an appointment card and a growing sense of dread that had nothing to do with Sarah's potential affair. The entire conversation had been wrong. Harris's panic, his trembling hands, his desperate attempts to talk Leo out of the tests, none of it made sense. Unless Harris already knew something. Unless the tests wouldn't just expose Sarah's betrayal. Sitting in his Mercedes in the parking lot, Leo watched through the window as Harris paced his office, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing wildly. Calling the lab or calling someone else? Looking back, I should have questioned why a doctor I'd trusted for 3 decades seemed so terrified. I should have asked myself what secret could make a man's hands shake like that. I should have walked away right then, gotten in my car and never looked back. But I didn't, and that decision would cost me everything. 11 days later, Dr. Harris called at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. Leo was already awake, sitting in his home office in their Winnetka estate, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan through the wall of windows. Leslie was still asleep upstairs, or pretending to be. Lately, he couldn't tell the difference. "Leo, it's Bob. I have the results." Leo's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "And?" "They're Zellers, both kids. Jackson and Kimberly are definitely your biological grandchildren. The tests came back 99.9% conclusive." Harris spoke quickly, like he was reading from a script. "I've got the paperwork here if you want to come by and pick it up, but bottom line, you can put your mind at ease."
Leo should have felt relief flood through him, should have felt the knot in his chest loosen, the paranoia evaporate like steam. Instead, all he felt was a strange hollowness, like biting into an apple and finding it made of wax. That was fast. What?
11 days. You said 2 weeks, maybe longer. And that included a weekend in Veterans Day. They expedited it, as a favor to me. Professional courtesy. Right, professional courtesy. Leo set down his coffee. I'll stop by this afternoon. After hanging up, he sat there watching sailboats drift across the lake like white ghosts. He was being paranoid again. The tests were conclusive. Sarah wasn't cheating, or if she was, at least the kids were still Zellers. He should call his son, apologize for doubting him, maybe take everyone to Gibson's for dinner to make amends. So why did he feel like he'd just been lied to? The office door creaked open behind him. Leslie stood in the doorway wearing her silk robe, the morning light catching the silver in her auburn hair. At 55, she was still beautiful, the kind of elegant beauty that aged like fine wine, that turned heads at charity galas and made younger wives nervous. But this morning, her face looked drawn, pale. Who was on the phone? Dr. Harris. The DNA results came back. Her hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles going white. And? The kids are Zellers. Everything's fine. Leslie's exhale was so forceful it was almost a gasp. She moved into the room, wrapping her arms around herself, despite the house being warm. Thank God. So you can drop this now. Stop obsessing over Sarah and Matt and whatever you think you saw? There was something in her voice, not quite relief, not quite fear, something in between that Leo couldn't name. I wasn't obsessing, Les. I was being careful. Careful? She laughed, but it sounded wrong, brittle. You've been paranoid for weeks, following Sarah, interrogating Zeller, running secret DNA tests on your own grandchildren? That's not careful, Leo. That's... She stopped herself, pressing her fingers to her temples. I'm sorry. I've been worried about you. Worried about me? Yes. You're 62 years old, you have high blood pressure you refuse to take medication for, and you've been working yourself into a frenzy over something that turned out to be nothing. She crossed to him, placed her hand on his shoulder, but her touch felt cold even through his shirt. Please, let this go. For your health, for our family. Just let it go. Leo turned to look at her, really look at her. When had she started checking her phone constantly, jumping when it rang? When had she started finding excuses to leave rooms when he entered? When had the woman he'd been married to for 30 years become a stranger? Leslie, is there something you need to tell me? Her eyes widened. What? No. Why would you ask that? Because you've been acting strange for months, distant, distracted, and now you're pushing way too hard for me to drop this. I'm not pushing, I'm just... She pulled her hand away, wrapping the robe tighter. I'm trying to protect our family. Zeller and Sarah are happy. The kids are healthy. Why do you need to keep digging for problems that don't exist? Before Leo could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. Some doors should stay closed. His blood went cold. The same message as before, just worded differently. Someone was watching. Someone knew about the DNA tests. Who was that? Leslie asked, and there it was again, that edge of fear in her voice.
Wrong number. Leo stood, sliding the phone into his pocket. I'm going to shower and head into the office. Leo! I said I'm dropping it, Leslie. The tests came back fine. End of story. But it wasn't the end. That afternoon, sitting in Dr. Harris's office with the official-looking lab results in his hands, Leo felt that same wrongness gnawing at his gut. The letterhead was right. The numbers looked legitimate. The conclusion was clear. Too clear. Too perfect. Too convenient. And that night, lying in bed while Leslie's breathing came too quick and shallow to be real sleep, Leo made a decision. He'd get a second opinion, a private lab, one that Harris didn't know about, one that couldn't be influenced or manipulated.
because 30 years of building an empire had taught him one unshakable truth. When something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. What Leo didn't know yet was that his wife's anxiety wasn't about protecting Zeller. Leslie was afraid I'd discover what she'd been hiding for decades. And once that door opened, everything, their marriage, their family, their entire life together, would turn to ash. But he was already reaching for the handle. The following week, Leslie launched what Leo could only describe as a full-court press on his well-being. It started subtly, a comment over breakfast about the dark circles under his eyes, a suggestion that maybe he should skip his morning workout because he looked exhausted. Then it escalated. "You know, honey, I was reading an article in the Tribune about men your age and stress-related heart attacks," she said one evening as they sat in the sunroom, her glass of Chardonnay catching the fading light. "Executives who don't know when to step back, they push and push until their bodies just give out." Leo glanced up from his iPad where he'd been reviewing quarterly reports. "I'm fine, Les. I had a physical 6 months ago. Harris said my heart's strong as an ox." "Harris?" She set down her wine glass a bit too hard. "When's the last time you actually listened to Bob's advice? You don't take your blood pressure medication. You work 70-hour weeks. You're 62 years old, Leo, not 42. There it was again, his age. She'd mentioned it 3 times in the past 2 days, like she was trying to convince him he had one foot in the grave. What's this really about, Leslie?
It's about me not wanting to be a widow before I'm 60. She stood, moving to the window overlooking their perfectly manicured lawn. You've built something incredible. Mitchell Industries will survive without you micromanaging every detail. Maybe it's time to think about slowing down, enjoying life, enjoying us. Leo studied his wife's reflection in the darkening window. Her shoulders were tense, her fingers wrapped too tightly around the wine glass. This is about the DNA tests, isn't it? She spun around. This is about you creating unnecessary drama that could literally kill you. Do you know what stress does to aging men? To their hearts? To their... She stopped abruptly, her face flushing. To their what? Nothing. Forget it. She drained her wine and headed toward the door. I'm going to bed. Try not to work yourself into another anxiety spiral. But Leo didn't forget it. Over the next few days, Leslie's campaign intensified. She started leaving articles on his desk, printouts from WebMD about erectile dysfunction and declining testosterone in men over 60. She made appointments with a concierge wellness clinic in Streeterville without asking him first. She even suggested, over dinner at Gibson's with Zeller and Sarah, that maybe it was time for Leo to think about legacy planning and succession. Dad's not dying, Mom, Zeller had laughed, uncomfortable. He's just hitting his stride. But Leslie hadn't laughed. She'd just stared at Leo with those anxious eyes, her untouched filet mignon growing cold on her plate. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Leo had decided, against his better judgment, to do a little surveillance on Sarah and Matt, just one more time to see if his instincts were still screaming for a reason. He'd parked across from the Starbucks on Wabash where they sometimes met for what Sarah claimed were project updates. His phone rang. Leslie. Where are you? Downtown. I had a meeting. Really? Because I just called your office and Diane said you left 2 hours ago with no explanation. Her voice was sharp, accusing. Please tell me you're not still obsessing over Sarah? Leo's jaw clenched. How did you know? Because I know you, Leo, and I'm telling you right now, drop it. Leave Zeller and Sarah alone. Leave the kids alone. This paranoia is unhealthy and it needs to stop. Since when do you tell me what to do? Since you started acting like a crazy person. Her voice cracked. You got your test results. The kids are Zeller's. What more do you want? What are you even looking for? The truth. A long silence. When Leslie spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes the truth isn't worth what it costs. She hung up before he could respond. That evening, Leo found her in the master bedroom, talking in hushed tones on her cell phone. She ended the call the moment she saw him, her face guilty. Who was that? Just coordinating with the caterer for the foundation gala next month. At 8 o'clock at night. It's a busy time of year. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Did you eat? I can heat up the lasagna from last night. But Leo wasn't hungry. He was too busy watching his wife move around their bedroom like a stranger, too busy noticing the way her phone kept lighting up with texts she angled away from him, too busy remembering something that hadn't seemed important until now. The day after he'd told Leslie about requesting the DNA tests, Dr. Harris had called her. Leo had overheard part of the conversation from the hallway, Leslie's voice tight and urgent, saying something about keeping him calm and we can't let him. Can't let him what? Over the next week, Leo started paying closer attention. Leslie and Dr. Harris had always been friendly. 30 years of family dinners and holiday parties had made that inevitable, but now their interactions felt different, coordinated. When Harris called to check in on Leo's stress levels, Leslie was always nearby, listening intently. When Leslie pushed Leo to cancel his annual executive physical with Northwestern Memorial and use Harris instead, she'd been almost frantic. And then there was the way they looked at each other at the foundation gala, a glance across the ballroom that lasted just a second too long, weighted with something Leo couldn't name. The night after the gala, Leo lay awake while Leslie slept beside him, her breathing finally even and deep. In the darkness, he replayed every conversation, every strange moment, every time she'd pushed him to drop his investigation, or take it easy, or trust Harris's judgment. Why was my wife so desperate to keep me from digging deeper? What was she so afraid I'd find? And why did I have the growing, terrible suspicion that whatever secret she was hiding had nothing to do with Sarah at all? Leo had built a billion-dollar empire by trusting his instincts and verifying everything. In business, he'd learned early that people lied. Accountants cooked books, partners hid assets, employees stole. The only defense was diligence, double-checking, maintaining systems of verification that caught liars before they could burn you. So why should his personal life be any different? On a cold Monday morning in late November, Leo drove 45 minutes northwest to a medical complex in Barrington he'd found through a business associate. The clinic was small, discreet, the kind of place that catered to executives and celebrities who valued privacy above all else. No insurance billing, no electronic health records shared with hospital networks, no chance of information leaking to people who might know Dr. Robert Harris. Dr. Barnett Ashton, no relation to Matt Ashton, though Leo had checked, met him in a consultation room, decorated more like a boutique hotel than a medical office. Mid-40s, Harvard-trained, with a reputation for thoroughness and discretion that had cost Leo $5,000 just for the initial appointment. "Mr. Mitchell," she shook his hand firmly, gesturing to a leather chair. "My assistant said you needed a comprehensive evaluation and that confidentiality was paramount." That's right. Leo had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times during the drive. "I need a complete physical workup. Blood work, cardiac screening, the works. But specifically, I need fertility testing." Dr. Barnett's eyebrow raised slightly, but her expression remained professional. "Fertility testing? At 62, that's an unusual request. May I ask why?" "Because I don't trust the results I've been given by my current physician." Leo pulled out the DNA test results Harris had provided, along with medical records he'd requested from his own file. "I need independent verification, and I need to know if I'm even capable of having fathered children." Dr. Barnett took the documents, scanning them with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of medical deception. "You understand that male fertility can change over time. A man who was fertile at 30 might not be at 60. I understand, but I need to know my baseline, what I was capable of 30 years ago." Leo leaned forward. "Doctor, I'm going to be blunt. I think my family physician has been lying to me. I think these DNA results might be fabricated, and I think there's a possibility that my 2 adult sons might not be biologically mine."
If Dr. Barnett was shocked, she didn't show it. She simply nodded, making notes on her tablet. That's a serious allegation. Have you considered the legal implications? If you're right, there could be, I don't care about legal implications. I care about the truth. Leo's voice cracked slightly. I've spent 30 years raising these boys, loving them, building something for them to inherit. I need to know if they're actually mine, or if I've been living a lie my entire adult life.
Dr. Barnett set down her tablet, her expression softening. Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask, are you prepared for what the truth might reveal? Once you know, you can't unknow it. Everyone keeps asking me that. My wife, my doctor, now you. Leo rubbed his face, suddenly feeling every one of life. But I didn't get where I am by hiding from hard truths. I need to know. All right, Dr. Barnett stood. I'll need blood samples, a complete medical history, including any childhood illnesses or injuries that might affect fertility, and I'll want to run a comprehensive hormone panel. The fertility analysis will take about a week, maybe 10 days for the full report. And the DNA comparison? Can you verify whether those results are legitimate? I can have my lab run independent tests if you can provide samples from your sons, but Mr. Mitchell, they'd need to consent to... I have their toothbrushes. Leo pulled out 2 Ziploc bags from his briefcase, feeling like a character in a bad crime drama. He'd taken them from Zeller and Elsie's bathrooms during Thanksgiving dinner last week, while everyone was watching the Lions game. Will that work? Dr. Barnett stared at the bags for a long moment. It will work, though I have to say, in 20 years of practice, I've never had a patient come this prepared for what is essentially a family investigation. I've spent 40 years learning that the people closest to you are often the ones with the most to hide. The examination took 2 hours, blood draws, physical tests, questions about his medical history going back to childhood. Dr. Barnett was thorough, professional, and mercifully non-judgmental about the cloak and dagger nature of the whole affair. As Leo was buttoning his shirt afterward, Dr. Barnett paused at the door. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something. If these tests confirm your worst fears, if your sons aren't biologically yours, what will you do? Leo thought about Zeller's graduation from Kellogg, about teaching Elsie to drive on the back roads near their summer house in Door County, about all the Little League games and parent-teacher conferences and father-son fishing trips. 30 years of memories, of love, of building a family. I honestly don't know, he admitted, but I'd rather face the truth and figure it out than spend the rest of my life wondering. Dr. Barnett nodded. I'll call you when the results are in. In the meantime, try not to let this consume you. Whatever the truth is, it won't change who you've been for the past 30 years. But she was wrong about that, because what the private doctor found would shatter 30 years of my life. It would reveal that the woman I'd loved since I was 32 had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. It would prove that my best friend had been lying to my face for 3 decades, and it would force me to confront a truth so devastating that part of me wished I'd never started looking. The call came 8 days later. Dr. Barnett's voice was careful, measured, the tone doctors use when they're about to destroy your world. Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk. Can you come in today? I knew before I even asked. I knew from the gravity in her voice, from the pit in my stomach, from the way my hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Just tell me. Not over the phone, please. You need to be sitting down for this. And that's when I knew that everything I'd built, everything I'd believed, everything I'd loved for 30 years was about to crumble into dust. Dr. Barnett's office felt different this time. The soft lighting that had seemed calming before now felt oppressive, like the dim glow of a funeral home. Leo sat in the same leather chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Dr. Barnett sat across from him, a manila folder on her lap that might as well have been a loaded gun.
Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed all your test results, multiple times actually, because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I presented this to you. She opened the folder, her movements deliberate. Your blood work shows something significant. You have a condition called azoospermia, the complete absence of sperm in your semen. Based on the hormone levels and testicular markers, this isn't a recent development. Leo's mouth went dry. What does that mean? It means you're infertile, completely. And based on the specific markers in your blood work, you've likely been this way since your early 30s, possibly earlier. There's evidence of testicular atrophy that suggests a long-term condition, potentially caused by an undiagnosed infection or injury in your 20s. The room tilted. Leo gripped the armrests harder, trying to anchor himself to something solid. But that's impossible. I have 2 sons. Zeller's 29, Elsie is 26. I was there when they were born. I held them in the delivery room. I understand this is difficult to process. Dr. Barnett's voice was gentle but unwavering. But Mr. Mitchell, the medical evidence is conclusive. You could not have fathered children naturally. Not 29 years ago, not 26 years ago, not ever. Leo's mind fractured. Suddenly he was back in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, 1995, watching through the delivery room window as they cleaned up his newborn son. Zeller had been screaming his lungs out, red-faced and furious, and Leo had thought he'd never seen anything so beautiful in his life. He'd called his own father from the hospital payphone, voice breaking with joy. "Dad, I'm a father. I have a son." Then, 3 years later, Elsie's birth at the same hospital. Quieter, calmer, those serious gray eyes looking up at Leo like he was trying to figure out the universe. Leslie, exhausted but radiant, whispering, "We make good babies, don't we? We make good babies." The lie of it punched through him like a fist. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to breathe. You're hyperventilating." Leo realized he was gasping, his chest tight, spots dancing in his vision. Dr. Barnett pressed a paper bag into his hands, and he breathed into it like a panicked child, the absurdity of it cutting through his shock. After a moment, his breathing steadied. "You're saying my wife cheated on me, twice, and I never knew. I'm saying you couldn't have biologically fathered your sons. I can't speak to the circumstances of their conception." But Leo's mind was already racing through the implications like a freight train barreling down the tracks. Leslie, pregnant with Zeller in 1995. They'd been married 5 years by then, trying for a baby for 2 of them. He'd been traveling constantly, building Mitchell Industries from the ground up, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. He trusted her completely, never questioned, never doubted. And then Elsie, 3 years later, same story. Leo working 100-hour weeks, Leslie managing their home, their marriage, their life. She'd told him she was pregnant over dinner at Jean and Giorgetti, and he'd cried right there at the table, steak going cold while he held her hands and thanked God for blessing them again. Blessed. What a joke.
"I taught them to ride bikes," Leo heard himself say, his voice distant. "Zeller crashed into our neighbor's fence and needed 6 stitches. Elsie was so scared he didn't try again for a month. I was patient with him. I never pushed." He looked up at Dr. Barnett. "I took them fishing every summer at our place in Wisconsin. Zeller caught a muskie when he was 12, and we had it mounted. It's still on my office wall." "Mr. Mitchell, I taught them to drive, sat through their terrible teenage bands, paid for their college, their apartments, their first cars. Zeller's wedding cost me $150,000. A laugh bubbled up, edged with hysteria. "I walked a son who isn't mine down the aisle." Dr. Barnett leaned forward. "Biology doesn't define fatherhood. You raised those boys. You loved them. That's real, regardless of genetics." "Is it?" Leo stood abruptly, pacing the small office. "Because right now it feels like my entire life has been one big lie. My wife's been lying to me for 30 years. My sons," his voice cracked. "Jesus Christ, do they even know? Are they in on it?" "I doubt it. Most children have no reason to question their paternity." Leo stopped pacing, a new horror dawning.
The DNA tests, the ones Dr. Harris ran for the grandchildren. He said they matched Zeller. If Zeller isn't mine, but the kids are his, then Harris was telling the truth about that, at least. It would appear so. But he lied about... Leo's hands were shaking again. He's been our family doctor for 30 years. He delivered both my sons. He would have known. He would have seen Leslie's medical records, known about my infertility. The realization hit him like a wrecking ball. Dr. Harris had known. All along, for 30 decades, his trusted friend and confidant had known that Leo was raising another man's children, had watched Leo beam with pride at every milestone, every achievement, every father-son moment, had listened to Leo's plans for passing down his legacy to his boys, his biological heirs, and had said nothing. "Who?" Leo's voice came out as a rasp. "The DNA tests from the toothbrushes. Can you tell who fathered my sons?" Dr. Barnett hesitated. "We'd need a reference sample to compare against. Do you have any suspicions?" Suspicions. Leo's mind churned through 30 years of memories, looking for clues he'd been too blind to see. Leslie's friends, his business partners, neighbors, colleagues. Who had been around during those crucial years? Who had she been close to? And then it hit him. The man who'd been there for everything, every birth, every illness, every family crisis. The man Leslie called constantly, who came to their house for dinner at least once a month, who'd been at every birthday party and holiday gathering. The man who'd begged Leo not to dig deeper. "Oh my God," Leo whispered. "Harris! It's Harris, isn't it?" Dr. Barnett's silence was answer enough. "But if I couldn't have children, then who fathered Zeller and Elsie? And how many other people knew the truth about my life while I lived in blissful ignorance, building a legacy for sons who weren't even mine?" Dr. Barnett didn't make Leo wait. She pulled out another set of documents, these ones marked with highlighted sections and comparative DNA markers that looked like abstract art to Leo's untrained eyes. "I took the liberty of running a full genetic analysis," she said quietly. "The samples you provided, your son's toothbrushes, I compared them against your DNA and also ran them through a genealogical database to look for paternal markers." Leo couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, just waited for the executioner's axe to fall. "Both your sons, Zeller and Elsie, share genetic markers that exclude you as their biological father, but they do share significant paternal DNA with each other, which means they have the same biological father." She paused, her finger hovering over a section of the report. "Mr. Mitchell, you mentioned Dr. Harris as a possibility. Do you have any way to obtain a DNA sample from him?" "I don't need to." Leo's voice sounded dead even to his own ears. The way he acted when I asked for the DNA tests, the panic, the fake results he gave me. He wasn't protecting Sarah or Zeller. He was protecting himself. Dr. Barnett nodded slowly. "Without a confirmed sample, I can't state with absolute certainty, but given the circumstances and his behavior, it's a reasonable conclusion." Leo's mind spun backward through 30 years of friendship, meeting Harris at that charity golf tournament in 1993, both of them young and ambitious, Harris fresh off his residency at Northwestern, Leo still building his company from nothing. They'd bonded over bourbon and Bulls games, over their shared love of sailing on Lake Michigan. Harris had introduced Leo to Leslie at a fundraiser later that year. "My cousin's roommate from college," he'd said, laughing. "She's way out of your league, Mitchell, but shoot your shot." Leo had fallen hard and fast. Leslie was elegant, intelligent, funny, everything he'd ever wanted. They'd married in 1990, a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Harris had been Leo's best man, had given a toast about how Leo was the luckiest man alive. "You're getting the girl, the career, the whole American dream," Harris had said, champagne glass raised. "Some guys have all the luck." Some guys have all the luck. Had it started before the wedding or after? When had his best friend started sleeping with his wife? When had their marriage become a lie? The timeline matters, Leo said suddenly. When did this affair start? Before Zeller was born, or... Based on the children's ages, 29 and 26, we're looking at conception approximately 30 years ago and 27 years ago, respectively. Dr. Barnett's voice was clinical, detached, which somehow made it worse. I can't tell you when the affair began, only when the children were conceived. 1995 and 1998. Leo had been drowning in work both those years. The company had been expanding rapidly. He'd opened offices in Atlanta and Denver, had been traveling 3 weeks out of 4. He'd missed doctor's appointments, had Leslie go to prenatal checkups alone because he was stuck in board meetings or flying to close deals. And every time, Harris had been there. Don't worry, I'll make sure Leslie gets to her appointments. That's what friends are for. Friends.
Leo stood, pacing the office like a caged animal. The DNA tests he ran for the grandchildren, the ones that said they were Zellers, those were real, weren't they? He just faked the ones that would have exposed him. It appears so. He gave you accurate results about your grandchildren's paternity because those tests didn't threaten his secret. But if he'd run legitimate tests comparing you to your sons, the truth would have come out. So he fabricated them, probably used some local lab that would do whatever he asked, no questions. Leo laughed bitterly. And I trusted him. For 30 years, I trusted him with everything. My health, my family, my life. Mr. Mitchell, I know this is devastating, but you need to consider what you're going to do with this information. Confronting your wife, Dr. Harris, your sons, these are conversations that will change your family permanently. My family? Leo turned on her, anger finally breaking through the shock. I don't have a family. I have a wife who's been cheating on me for 3 decades and 2 sons who aren't even mine. I have a best friend who's been living a double life, playing father to his own children while watching me play the fool. Your sons don't know. You said so yourself. Zeller and Elsie. Leo said their names like he was testing them, seeing if they still fit. I named them. Zeller after Leslie's grandfather, Elsie after my father Eldon. I gave them their names, raised them, shaped who they are, and none of it was real. It was real to them. You're still their father in every way that matters. But Leo wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking about every moment that now felt tainted. Teaching Zeller to throw a football in the backyard of their first house in Evanston, helping Elsie with his homework at the kitchen table, patient through every math problem, the pride that had swelled in his chest when Zeller graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, when Elsie got his first job at a nonprofit doing work that actually mattered. All of it built on lies. The business, Leo said suddenly. Mitchell Industries. I've been grooming Zeller to take over. Elsie's on the board. My entire succession plan is built around passing my legacy to my sons. He looked at Dr. Barnett. Sons who aren't mine, who carry another man's DNA, who will pass on Harris's genes, not mine, to their children. Legally, they're still your sons. You're on their birth certificates. You raised them. But they're his. The word came out like poison. Harris's. Everything I built, everything I worked for, it's all going to his bloodline, not mine. Dr. Barnett closed her folder. Mr. Mitchell, I strongly suggest you speak with a therapist before you confront anyone. This kind of revelation can lead to... To what? To me losing my mind? Leo grabbed his coat. I've already lost everything else. My wife, my best friend, my sons. My entire life has been one long con, and I was too stupid and trusting to see it. Where are you going? To get the truth, the whole truth. Leo headed for the door. And then I'm going to burn down every lie they've built, even if I have to burn down my whole life to do it. He drove back to Winnetka in a daze, his mind replaying every family dinner where Harris had sat at their table, every Christmas morning where he'd watched Leo's sons, his own sons, open presents, every milestone he'd celebrated as Uncle Bob while knowing the whole time that he was their father. My wife, my doctor, my supposed best friend, they all betrayed me, and my sons never knew. They grew up calling me dad, looking up to me, trusting me to guide them through life, while the man who actually fathered them smiled and nodded and kept the secret locked away like buried treasure. And tonight, I was going to dig it all up. Consequences be damned.
Leo arrived home at 9:47 p.m. The Winnetka house was lit up like a cruise ship, every window glowing warm against the December cold. Through the front window, he could see Leslie in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book and a glass of wine, looking like a picture from Architectural Digest, the perfect wealthy wife in her perfect wealthy home. He sat in the Mercedes for 10 minutes, engine off, watching her. How many nights had he come home to this exact scene? How many times had he kissed her hello, poured himself a drink, settled into his chair to discuss their day like a normal married couple? Thousands, tens of thousands, all of it a performance. When he finally walked through the door, Leslie looked up with a smile that died the moment she saw his face. "Leo? What's wrong? You look—" "We need to talk." He set his briefcase down with deliberate care, like he was defusing a bomb. "Right now." She set down her wine glass, her face already going pale. "Is it your heart? Did something happen at—" "I went to see another doctor, a specialist." Leo pulled the medical reports from his briefcase, held them up like evidence in a trial. "Want to guess what she found?" Leslie's face went from pale to gray. Her hand reached for the arm of the couch, gripping it like she might fall. "Leo, please!" "I'm infertile, Leslie. Have been since my early 30s, maybe earlier." His voice was eerily calm, each word precise, which means I couldn't have fathered Zeller or Elsie, physically impossible. The glass of wine slipped from her fingers, red Cabernet spreading across the cream-colored Persian rug like blood. She didn't seem to notice. "How long have you known?" Leo asked. "About my infertility. How long?" Leslie's mouth opened and closed. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Since 1994. We'd been trying for 2 years. I made you go to Dr. Harris for testing, remember?" Leo did remember. He'd been embarrassed, resistant, but Leslie had insisted. "We need to know what we're dealing with," she'd said. Harris had run the tests, called Leo a week later, told him everything was fine. "Sometimes these things just take time," Harris had said. "Keep trying. Keep trying." "He lied to me. You both lied to me." "He was trying to protect you. You were so stressed about the business, about proving yourself. We didn't want—" Leslie stood, reaching for him, but Leo stepped back like she was contaminated. "So you decided to have an affair instead, with my best friend?" "It wasn't like that." Leslie's voice broke. "It wasn't some sordid affair, Leo. It was— we were trying to help you." "Help me?" Leo's laugh was harsh, ugly. "How does sleeping with my best friend help me?" Leslie wrapped her arms around herself, looking suddenly smaller, older. When she spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "You wanted children so badly. You talked about it constantly, passing on your legacy, building something for your sons to inherit. After Harris told me about your infertility, I was devastated. I didn't know how to tell you. I knew it would destroy you. So you decided to destroy me differently." "No, I decided to give you what you wanted." She was crying harder now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Harris and we talked about options, sperm donors, adoption, but you would have known then. You would have known you couldn't father children, and I couldn't bear to watch that break you." Leo stared at her, comprehension dawning like acid. "So you had his children and let me believe they were mine." Leslie nodded, her whole body shaking. "It was supposed to be once, just once. I'd get pregnant, you'd have your son, and no one would ever know. Harris agreed because he loved you too, because he wanted to help." "When?"
December 1994, after your company's Christmas party. You were so drunk you passed out in the car. Harris drove us home, helped me get you to bed, and then—" She couldn't finish. Leo felt bile rise in his throat. He remembered that night, remembered Harris being the designated driver, remembered waking up the next morning with a splitting headache and Leslie beside him. They joked about how he couldn't hold his liquor anymore. And Elsie?
3 years later, same situation. You wanted another child. You were so happy with Zeller. I thought, her voice cracked, I thought I was giving you the family you dreamed of, the sons you deserved. The sons I deserved? Leo's voice rose. You gave me another man's children and let me raise them as mine for 30 years. You let me love them, bond with them, plan my entire future around them, while you and Harris knew the truth the whole time. We did it for you, Leslie screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. Everything we did was to protect you, to give you the life you wanted. You were building an empire, Leo. You needed heirs. You needed sons. I gave them to you. You gave me lies. Leo hurled the medical reports across the room, papers scattering like snow. You gave me a family built on betrayal. You gave me 30 years of playing the fool while my wife and my best friend laughed behind my back. We never laughed. God, Leo, we've been in hell. Do you know what it's like watching Harris at family dinners, watching him see his own sons call another man dad? Do you know how many times he wanted to tell you to come clean? Then why didn't he? Because we loved you. Leslie collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Because telling you would have destroyed everything. Your marriage, your friendship, your relationship with your sons. We couldn't do that to you. Leo stood there, watching his wife fall apart, feeling nothing. No sympathy, no anger, just a vast emptiness where his life used to be. I'm going to Harris's house, he said finally. I'm going to hear this from him. Leo, please, it's almost 10 o'clock. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning. He's going to look me in the eye and tell me how he's been living as my best friend while fathering my children. Leo drove to Harris's brownstone in Lincoln Park, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind eerily calm. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. After this conversation, there would be no more questions, no more doubts, just the raw, terrible truth. Harris answered the door in pajamas and a Northwestern hoodie, his face crumbling the moment he saw Leo's expression. She told you. Everything. Leo pushed past him into the house. But I want to hear it from you, all of it. 30 years of lies, and I want every single one. Harris closed the door, leaning against it like he needed the support. I've been waiting for this day since 1994, dreading it, knowing it would come eventually. Then talk, and Harris did. He talked about the Christmas party, about Leslie's desperation to give Leo children, about their mutual decision to deceive him for his own good. He talked about the guilt that had eaten at him for 3 decades, about watching his biological sons grow up calling another man dad, about every family gathering that felt like a knife in his chest. I've lived with this lie for 30 years. Harris said, his voice hollow. Every time you thanked me for being there for your family, every time you called me your best friend, every time you told me how proud you were of your sons, it killed me a little more. But I couldn't tell you, because telling you meant losing you, and I couldn't bear that. So instead, you just kept lying. Yes, Harris's face was wet with tears. Yes, I kept lying, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Leo stood there in his best friend's living room, surrounded by photos of Harris's life, his ex-wife, his daughter from that marriage, vacation snapshots, professional achievements, a whole life running parallel to Leo's, intersecting at every major moment. You faked the DNA tests for the grandchildren. Yes, when you asked me to run them, I knew you were starting to suspect something. If I'd run legitimate tests and they'd come back showing you weren't Zeller's father, Harris shook his head. I couldn't let that happen, so I fabricated the results. Making you a fraud on top of everything else. Yes.
Leo headed for the door, unable to look at Harris anymore, but he stopped with his hand on the knob, one last question burning in his throat. Do you love them? Zeller and Elsie? Do you love them? Harris's voice broke. With everything I am. They're my sons, Leo. I've watched them grow up from a distance, watched them become men, and I love them more than I can say. But they're yours, too. In every way that matters, they're yours. No, said Leo quietly. They're not. They never were. He left Harris standing in his doorway, broken and crying, and drove home through the empty Chicago streets. The legacy they'd tried to save, the family, the business, the perfect life they'd constructed, he was about to destroy it all. Because if I'd learned anything in 40 years of business, it was this. You can't build anything lasting on a foundation of lies. And tomorrow, I'd start tearing it all down. Leo called the family meeting for Sunday morning at 10. Not at the house. He couldn't bear to do this, surrounded by 30 years of family photos and memories that now felt like elaborate props in a stage play. Instead, he rented a conference room at the Hilton downtown, neutral territory, somewhere that wouldn't be haunted by ghosts of Christmas mornings and birthday parties. Zeller arrived first, looking annoyed in his North Face jacket and weekend jeans. Dad, what's this about? You said it was urgent, but I had plans with Sarah and the kids. Wait for your brother. Elsie showed up 10 minutes later, concerned rather than irritated. Everything okay? Mom said you've been upset about something. Sit down, both of you. They sat across from him at the conference table, two men who looked so much like each other and nothing like Leo. How had he never seen it before? The shape of their eyes, the set of their jaws, even the way they both drummed their fingers when they were nervous. All Harris, all borrowed traits from a man who wasn't supposed to be their father. I need to tell you something that's going to change everything, Leo began, his voice steady, despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. About your mother, about Dr. Harris, about who you really are. And then he told them everything. The infertility, the affair, the 30-year deception, the fake DNA tests. He laid it out like a prosecutor presenting evidence, clinical and precise, because if he let any emotion in, he'd shatter completely. Zeller's face went through a progression of expressions, confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a rage so pure it made him shake. He stood up so violently his chair toppled backward. You're lying. This is some sick joke because you're still pissed about Sarah. I have medical records, DNA tests from an independent lab. I have everything documented. He slid the folder across the table. Dr. Robert Harris is your biological father, both of you. Elsie grabbed the folder with trembling hands, scanning the documents. His face went white. No, this is wrong. These tests are wrong. Dad, you're my dad. You taught me to drive. You helped me move into my first apartment. I raised you, but I didn't father you. That's the same thing, Elsie cracked. Biology doesn't matter. You're still my father. But Zeller was pacing now, his hands in his hair, pulling at it like he wanted to rip it out. Mom cheated on you? With Harris? For years? Twice, as far as I know, once for each of you. Jesus Christ, kicked the fallen chair, sending it skidding across the floor. Do you know what this means? My entire life is a lie. Everything I thought I knew about our family, about who I am, it's all bullshit. It's not bullshit, Elsie insisted, standing now too. Dad is still Dad. Nothing changes just because of some DNA test.
Everything changes. Zeller wheeled on his brother. Don't you get it? We're not Mitchells. We're, what, Harrises? The sons of Mom's affair partner? Everything Dad built, everything he planned for us, it was all based on thinking we were his blood. Leo watched his sons, not his sons, Harris's sons, fracture before his eyes. Zeller angry and confrontational, Elsie defensive and denial deep. The same patterns they'd had since childhood, just pointed at a different target now. "Where's Mom?" Zeller demanded. "Does she know you're telling us?" "She knows. I told her last night." "And Harris?" "Him too." Of course, Uncle Bob is actually our father. All those times he came to our games, our graduations, acting like the proud family friend. He was watching his own kids, and we had no idea." "He wanted to tell you," Leo said quietly. "Leslie said he wanted to come clean multiple times." "But didn't, because they're both cowards," Zeller was shouting now, his face red. "They let you raise us, let you love us, let you plan your entire legacy around us, all while knowing we weren't yours." "You are mine," Leo said, and his voice finally broke. 29 years, 26 years, those are real. I changed your diapers, stayed up nights when you were sick, taught you everything I know. That's real, Zeller. That counts for something. "Does it?" Zeller's eyes were wet now. "Because from where I'm standing, it just makes this whole thing more tragic. You loved us thinking we were yours, and now you know we're not. How do you even look at us without seeing her betrayal, without seeing his face instead of yours?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Leo had no answer because Zeller was right. Every time he looked at them now, he saw Harris's features, Leslie's lies, 30 years of deception. "I need to call Sarah," Zeller said suddenly. "I need to... Christ, my marriage is already hanging by a thread because of Dad's paranoia about her and Matt. And now this? How do I tell my wife that my whole family is built on infidelity?" "Sarah's affair seems pretty trivial right now," Elsie said quietly. "Are you defending her?" "I'm not defending anyone. I'm just saying." Elsie turned to Leo, desperate. "Dad, this doesn't change anything between us, right? You're still my father. I'm still your son." But Leo couldn't answer, because it did change things. How could it not? Every time he'd looked at his boys and seen himself, his father, his grandfather, he'd been wrong. The Mitchell legacy he'd been so proud to pass down didn't exist. It was a Harris legacy now, whether he liked it or not. "I need you both to leave," Leo said finally. "I need time to figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" Zeller's voice was sharp. "You mean with the business? With your will? Are you cutting us out?" "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore." Elsie moved around the table, reaching for Leo, but Leo stood and stepped back. He couldn't bear to be touched right now, couldn't bear the weight of comfort from sons who weren't his. "Dad!" Elsie's voice broke completely. "Just go, please."
They left, Zeller storming out with rage radiating off him like heat, Elsie moving slowly, looking back with tears streaming down his face. The door clicked shut, and Leo was alone in the sterile conference room with its generic hotel art and coffee-stained carpets. He sank into his chair, finally letting the mask crack. 62 years old, and his entire life had been reduced to rubble. The family he'd built, gone. The marriage he'd trusted, destroyed. The sons he'd loved, not his. The friend he'd cherished, a betrayer. He had built a billion-dollar empire, but it was all built on lies, and now he had to decide, rebuild from the ashes or let it all burn. 3 days passed in a fog. Leo moved through the Winnetka house like a ghost, sleeping in the guest room, avoiding Leslie, who'd become a permanent fixture on the living room couch, her eyes red and swollen, her usual elegance replaced by unwashed hair and yesterday's clothes. Zeller called 17 times. Leo ignored every call.
Elsie showed up at the door twice. Leo had the housekeeper send him away. On the fourth day, Leo finally entered his study, the room where this nightmare had started with a simple suspicion about Sarah, the room where he'd first decided to order those DNA tests. If he just left it alone, if he just trusted his family, he'd still be living in blissful ignorance. But he couldn't decide if that would have been better or worse. The study was exactly as he'd left it, frozen in time like a museum exhibit of his former life. His father's desk, the one Leo had inherited when Eldon passed in 2003. The built-in shelves lined with leather-bound first editions and business books he'd actually read, annotated, learned from. The walls covered in photos documenting decades of a life he'd thought was his. Leo stood before them now, a tumbler of Maker's Mark in his hand, studying each frame like he was seeing them for the first time. There was Zeller at 7, gap-toothed and grinning in his Little League uniform, holding up a trophy from the championship game. Leo remembered that day perfectly. Late June heat, the smell of hot dogs and cut grass, the way Zeller had run to him after the final out, screaming, "Dad, did you see? Did you see?" Leo had lifted him up, jersey sweaty and grass-stained, feeling like the proudest father in Illinois. Next to it, Elsie at his high school graduation, cap tilted at an angle, that serious expression he always wore when he was trying not to cry. He'd given a speech about following your conscience, even when it's not profitable, and Leo had watched from the audience thinking, "That's my boy, that's my son." Afterward, they'd gone to Gibson's, just the two of them, and Elsie had thanked him for never pushing him to be something he wasn't. "You let me be myself, Dad," he'd said, over expensive steaks. "Not everyone gets that." Further along, Zeller's wedding photo, Leo walking him down the aisle of Fourth Presbyterian Church because Sarah's father had passed years before. Zeller had been nervous, adjusting his tie compulsively, and Leo had squeezed his shoulder and whispered, "She's lucky to have you, son. You're going to be a great husband." The Mitchell family at their summer house in Door County, all 5 of them, including Leslie, before Zeller got married. Sunset over the lake, everyone wind-burned and happy from a day of sailing. That had been 2018. Maybe 2019, before the cracks started showing, when Leo still thought he knew who his family was. "They may not be my blood, but I raised them," Leo said aloud to the empty room. His voice sounded foreign, hoarse from days of barely speaking. "Every moment in these photos is real. Every memory, every lesson, every time they called me Dad, that was real." But another voice whispered back, darker and more insistent. "Biology built empires for thousands of years. Blood matters. Legacy matters. Would you be this understanding if Harris had stolen your money instead of your family?" Leo drained his bourbon, poured another. The truth was, he didn't know. Part of him still loved those boys with a ferocity that hadn't diminished despite the DNA tests. He'd die for them tomorrow if it came to it. But another part, the part that had built Mitchell Industries from nothing, that had fought and clawed and sacrificed for decades to create something permanent, that part felt gutted. Betrayed not just by Leslie and Harris, but by biology itself, by the universe's cruel joke of letting him pour 30 years of love into children who would pass on someone else's genes. His cell phone buzzed, a text from his attorney, Marcus Webb. "Ready when you are. Conference room is booked for 2 p.m. Cheen checked his watch. 1:47. Time to make the call that would define everything that came after. He found Leslie in the hallway outside his study, her face pale and drawn. She'd been waiting for him, he realized, probably waiting all morning. "Leo, please, can we talk?" "There's nothing left to say." "There's everything to say. You can't just—" Her voice broke. "You can't just shut me out, not after 30 years. I know I hurt you. I know what we did was unforgivable, but please, don't do this." "Do what?" "Whatever you're planning, with the will, with the business, with the boys.
She stepped closer, and he could smell her familiar perfume mixed with desperation. "They love you. You're their father, Leo. Don't take that away from them because you're angry at me." "Get Zeller and Elsie. Tell them to be here in an hour." "Why? What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done the day I found out." Leo moved past her, heading for the stairs. "I'm going to my lawyer's. When I come back, I want the family here, all of us, one last time." He left her standing in the hallway, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The drive to Marcus Webb's office in the Loop felt like a funeral procession. Leo's mind kept circling the same questions over and over. Does fatherhood require biology? Can love survive betrayal? Is forgiveness possible when the lies spanned decades? What would his own father have done? Eldon Mitchell had been a hard man, a factory worker who'd scraped together every penny to send Leo to college. "Blood is blood," he used to say. "Family takes care of its own." But Eldon had never faced this. His children were his, no question, no doubt. Marcus met him in the conference room, documents already spread across the mahogany table. The attorney was 58, sharp as a razor, and had handled Mitchell Industries' legal affairs for 20 years. He knew where all the bodies were buried. "Leo, before we start, are you certain about this? These changes are significant. Once the will is read, there's no walking it back." Leo sat down heavily, staring at the papers that would determine his legacy. Trust documents, corporate succession plans, personal bequests, billions of dollars hanging in the balance. "I need you to understand something, Marcus. For 30 years, I've been living a lie. My wife, my best friend, my entire family, they all knew the truth and kept it from me. Now I have to decide, do I honor the family I thought I had, or acknowledge the reality of what it actually was?" Marcus studied him over reading glasses. "What does your gut tell you?" And that was the question, wasn't it? Leo closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back through 30 years, teaching Zeller to ride a bike, reading bedtime stories to Elsie, high school football games and college move-in days, and Sunday dinners where they'd argue about politics and business and what it meant to be a good man. "Start the changes," Leo said quietly. "I know what I have to do."
2 hours later, Leo sat in his study at home, the revised will locked in his desk drawer, waiting for his family to arrive. Through the window, he watched the winter sun setting over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He heard them come in, Leslie's voice tight with anxiety, Zeller's sharp questions, Elsie's quieter pleading. They gathered in the living room, waiting for him to come down and deliver the verdict on their future. "I made my choice about the Mitchell fortune, but some decisions can never be undone. What would you do if your entire life was a lie? If the people you loved most had betrayed you in ways you never imagined possible? Would you choose love over blood? Forgiveness over justice? Or would you burn it all down and start over, even if it meant destroying the only family you'd ever known?" Tomorrow, they'd know my answer. Tomorrow, I'd either rebuild what was broken or demolish it completely. But tonight, for just a few more hours, I could sit in this moment between two futures and pretend I hadn't already made the choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Now, tell me what you have learned in today's story in the comments section. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, and also turn on the notification for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching. The concluding part will drop soon.